Folder hit the desk like a closing argument. I'd been in that office 100 times. I knew the crack in the second ceiling tile from the left. I knew the way the afternoon sun came through the blinds and cut stripes across the carpet. I'd sat across from my boss in that chair for 11 years, through 3 product launches, 2 acquisitions, and 1 near bankruptcy that I personally helped pull the company back from. But that Tuesday in March, I sat there and realized I was being processed. Not fired. Processed. Like paperwork. "We're moving in a different direction," my boss said. He was new. 8 months in. Came from a consulting firm in Chicago and had never once written a line of code, managed a production deployment, or stayed past 6 o'clock for anything other than the holiday party. He had good hair and a firm handshake, and he could talk about strategic pivots for 45 minutes without saying a single thing. He slid a severance agreement across the desk. I looked at it, looked at him. 11 years. I'd built the core infrastructure for every digital product this company had. My name was on the internal architecture documents going back to 2013. I'd trained half the engineering team. I'd turned down 2 outside offers. One from a firm in Seattle, one from a startup in Austin that got acquired 2 years later for $400 million, because I believed in what we were building here. And now there was a folder on the desk with my name on a tab. "We appreciate everything you've contributed," he said. I picked up the folder. I stood up. And I said, "Thanks." That was it. Just thanks. No scene. No speech. I shook his hand, walked out past the open floor where my team was heads down at their desks, and I took the elevator down to the parking garage. I sat in my car for maybe 10 minutes. Then I drove home. My wife was in the kitchen when I walked in. She took one look at my face and turned the stove off. She didn't ask what happened. She just put both arms around me and held on. That's 17 years of marriage. She already knew. After a while, she poured me a bourbon, Blanton's, the good one she keeps for bad days, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Tell me," she said. So I did. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She had this look she gets, calm and a little distant, like she's sorting through something in her head that she hasn't said yet. Then she said, "You know what this is, right? This is room." I didn't answer. "They just made room," she said. "You couldn't have done what comes next while you were still in that building." I didn't believe her. Not that night. I loved my wife more than anything in this world, but right then I thought she was just saying the thing a good spouse says. I thought I'd wake up tomorrow and the anger would still be there, sitting on my chest. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that she was more right than either of us understood. Let me back up, because the story doesn't start with the folder on the desk. It starts about 3 years earlier, when I made a decision that my boss, my real boss, the one who hired me, not the one who fired me, thought was slightly crazy. I'm a software architect. That's the short version. The longer version is that I spent over a decade designing the kind of back-end systems that nobody sees but everybody depends on. Payment processing, data pipelines, the infrastructure that sits underneath consumer-facing products and makes sure nothing falls apart at 2 in the morning when transaction volume spikes. I'm not the guy on stage at the product demo. I'm the reason the product demo doesn't crash. About 4 years ago, I started working on something on the side. My own time, my own equipment, my home office at 10 o'clock at night after the kids were in bed. I've been watching the way companies were trying to use AI to automate customer operations, the call center stuff, the claims processing, the back office workflows that were still mostly manual. And I kept seeing the same problem. The AI systems being deployed were too brittle. They'd work in demos and fall apart in production because nobody had built the middleware layer right. The handoff between the AI decision-making and the actual business systems was always the weak point. I had an idea about how to fix that. I spent about 18 months building it out. Not an app, not a product, a framework. A set of methods for structuring the integration between AI decision engines and legacy enterprise systems so the whole thing was stable and auditable and could actually scale. I filed for the patent myself. I paid for the attorney out of my own pocket. I used my home address on the paperwork. This is important. I want you to understand this clearly. I did this work entirely on my own time, on my own equipment, for my own purposes. I had spoken with an IP attorney before I started, specifically because I knew my employment agreement had IP assignment clauses. She reviewed my situation carefully. The work I was doing didn't fall under my employment scope. It wasn't related to my specific job function. It wasn't using company resources. She told me I was clean, and I kept every record to prove it. The patent was mine. I never tried to hide it from the company exactly, but I also never volunteered it. It was mine. It was the thing I'd built at night while the rest of the house was asleep. The thing that was separate from all the office politics and quarterly reviews and reorganization announcements. It was mine, and I intended to keep it that way. When my former employer started its AI transformation initiative, I'm using their words, about 2 years ago, they brought in consultants and bought a third-party platform and announced a big roadmap. My new boss stood up in an all-hands and talked about it for 30 minutes using slides that had a lot of gradient colors and very little technical substance. I sat in the back and listened and thought, this is going to fall apart in the integration layer. Every single time. I didn't say anything. I had learned by then that saying anything in those meetings was not what was wanted. The first week after I was let go was the worst. Not because of the money, we were financially okay, at least for a while. My wife worked, we had savings. The severance wasn't nothing. The worst part was the silence. 11 years of being needed, of having a reason to open my laptop at 8 in the morning and then nothing. Just the house and the coffee and too much time to think. My former teammates reached out. A few of them texted things like, "Are you doing all right?" and "This isn't right," and the one that hit hardest, from my senior engineer, a guy I'd mentored for 4 years, was just, "What are we supposed to do now?" I didn't have a good answer. I told him to keep his head down and do good work and things would sort themselves out. I meant it, mostly. I also knew that the AI integration project was going to hit a wall, and I had some idea of how high that wall was. I spent the second week doing something I hadn't done in years. I went through all my documentation, every spec I'd written in my own time, every version history on my personal drives, every email between me and my attorney. I organized everything. I built a clean record of exactly what the framework was when I'd built it, what it covered, and who owned it. Then I made a phone call. His name was Scott, and he was the head of enterprise solutions at a company I'll call Novatech Systems. They were, at the time, my former employer's largest competitor in the mid-market enterprise space. I'd met Scott twice at industry conferences over the years. We'd had real conversations, the kind you have when you're both technical enough to skip past the sales language and talk about the actual problems. I called him on a Thursday morning. I told him I had recently left my previous company and that I had something I wanted to show him. I was deliberate about my word choice. I didn't oversell. I didn't use numbers. I just said I had a framework that solved a problem he was definitely having, and I'd like 20 minutes of his time. He said he could do a call the following Monday. I spent the weekend preparing. My wife kept the kids occupied and let me work. Saturday night, she brought me a plate of food at my desk and didn't complain about the mess. Sunday evening, she sat with me for a few minutes and asked how I was feeling about it. "Nervous," I said, "but ready." She nodded. "You built a thing that works," she said. "That's all you have to do. Show them the thing that works." The call Monday morning was 20 minutes. By the end of it, Scott had asked if we could get his technical team on a follow-up call by Wednesday. The Wednesday call was 90 minutes. By Friday, I had a meeting scheduled with their VP of product and their general counsel. I want to be honest about something. During this whole stretch, the calls, the meetings, the back and forth, I never once thought about my former employer in terms of wanting to hurt them. I want to be clear about that because I know how this story sounds from the outside. It sounds like a revenge plot. And I understand why it reads that way. But when you're sitting in your home office putting together a licensing proposal and running the numbers and trying to figure out whether your attorney's red line on Section 4.2 is going to be a deal breaker, you're not thinking about revenge. You're working. You're doing the thing you're good at and hoping it's enough. What I was thinking about, honestly, was my team. The people I'd left behind in that building. I knew some of them were scared. I knew the AI project was going to hit problems. And I was thinking about what happened to them if the company started cutting heads when things went sideways. That's what I was carrying. Not anger, worry. 14 days after I was let go, I signed a licensing agreement with Novatech Systems. The framework I had developed, the middleware architecture, the integration protocols, the whole stack, was licensed to them for deployment across their enterprise product line. The valuation that we'd arrived at, after their technical team had done their due diligence and their business development team had modeled it out, was somewhere in the range that made my wife sit down when I told her. She sat down. She looked at the number I'd written on the notepad. She looked at me. 17 years ago, she said, you were a 26-year-old guy who worked too hard and slept too little, and you made me coffee wrong every single morning." "I still make your coffee wrong," I said. She laughed. It was the kind of laugh you get after you've been holding something tense for a long time. "You built this," she said. "You built all of this." The number on that notepad was just north of $800 million in projected licensing value over the contract term. It was not a check I deposited that afternoon. Licensing structures are complex, and the money comes in over time through royalties and deployment fees and milestone payments. But the agreement was real, and the value was real, and I sat in my kitchen and looked at the notepad for a long time. Now, I need to tell you what happened at my former company. Not because I take pleasure in it. I want to be honest about that. But it's part of the story, and you should know. About 3 weeks after I'd left, their AI integration project hit problems. I know this because my former senior engineer, the one who texted me, started sending me updates. Not to gloat. He was worried. The platform they'd bought was failing to integrate cleanly with their legacy billing system and their customer data layer. The kind of failure that I had seen coming from a mile away, and that my framework had been specifically designed to prevent. They brought in outside consultants. The consultants cost a lot of money and identified the problem, but proposed solutions that addressed the symptoms and not the root cause. More money, more delays. My former boss, meanwhile, had been presenting to the board and to investors based on an AI roadmap that had milestones he was now going to miss. Significantly miss. About 6 weeks after my last day, Novatech announced a partnership with an undisclosed technology licensor standard language for these things and began rolling out an AI integration framework across their enterprise product suite. The deployment was smooth. The integration was stable. Their technical team, who had spent an afternoon with me walking through the architecture, knew exactly what they had. The industry trade publications noticed. Not the licensing deal specifically. That was confidential. But the results were visible. Novatech started winning enterprise contracts that my former employer had expected to close. The performance gap became a competitive gap. I won't lay out everything that happened over the following months. Some of it I know from my former engineer's texts. Some of it was in public filings and press releases. My former employer had a very difficult year. There were leadership changes. The new boss who'd handed me that folder was gone by October. I don't celebrate that. I want to be precise about this. The people who got hurt in those leadership changes were mostly people like my former engineer, people who'd been working hard and doing the right things, and were now dealing with the consequences of decisions they'd had no part in making. That bothered me. It still does. What I did do, and I'm glad I did it, was reach out to 4 of the people from my former team who I knew were good and who I knew would be looking. I made calls. I connected them with the right people at Novatech and at 2 other companies I had relationships with. All 4 of them landed well. That mattered more to me than the number on the notepad. People ask me sometimes what I would have done if I'd known, when I walked out of that building, exactly how things were going to unfold. If I'd known about the deal, the number, all of it, I think I would have walked out the same way. I think I would have said thanks and shaken his hand and taken the elevator down to the parking garage. Because the thing I've come to understand, and this took me a while to get to, I won't pretend I arrived here overnight, is that the moment you start performing your exit, you've lost something. You've made it about him. You've made it about the folder on the desk, and the guy with the good hair and the consulting firm confidence. And he's not worth that. None of it was about him. It was always about the work. My wife was right. That Tuesday in March wasn't an ending. It was room. It was a door opening that I hadn't known was there because I'd been standing in front of it for 11 years. My oldest kid, who was 15 at the time, and had the particular teenage gift of saying the most clarifying things without trying, walked into the kitchen that first evening and said, "Dad, you kind of seem relieved." I thought about that for a moment. "Yeah," I said, "I think I am." Here's the thing nobody tells you about spending a decade being the most competent person in a room that doesn't want to hear it. You get used to making yourself smaller. Not consciously, just gradually, the way you learn to duck under a low beam in a room you walk through every day. You stop noticing you're doing it. It was only after I left that I realized how much energy I'd been spending on that. How much I'd been managing upward, softening my assessments, packaging my concerns in language that wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. I was good at it. I got too good at it. The framework I'd been building at night, in my own time, was the thing that had stayed honest. Nobody managed that. Nobody gave me feedback on how it was landing. It was just me and the problem and the work, and it was as good as I could make it because the only person I was answerable to was myself. That's the part I think about when I think about what I'd tell someone going through something similar, not the licensing deal, not the number on the notepad. The part about not giving away the thing that's really yours. Your skills are yours. Your reputation is yours. The relationships you built over years are yours. The intellectual work you do on your own time, with your own resources, that belongs to you. Protect it. Document it. Understand what it's worth before someone else tries to tell you. I was 52 years old when I walked out of that building. I'd spent 26 years in the industry, and 11 of them in one place, and I thought that loyalty meant something. Maybe it does. But loyalty to an institution and loyalty to your own integrity are not the same thing, and you should know the difference before the folder shows up on the desk. Scott and I had lunch last spring. We were at a place he liked in downtown Charlotte, nice, but not overdone. The kind of spot where you can have a real conversation. He's become a genuine friend over the past couple years. He's one of those people who's technically sharp and also just decent. You don't find that combination as often as you'd hope. He asked me at some point how I'd felt in those first days after leaving. I told him about sitting in the parking garage, about the bourbon my wife poured, about my kid saying I looked relieved. He listened and then he said, "You know what I think? I think you were done before they fired you. I think part of you was already ready to go and you just needed someone to open the door." I've thought about that a lot. He might be right. I think the part of me that was done, the part that had gotten too comfortable ducking under the beam, that part needed to be ended. And the part of me that built the framework at 10 o'clock at night, that part had been ready for a long time. My wife and I took a trip last fall, just the two of us, first real vacation we'd had in years without an inbox pulling me back. We went to Asheville for a long weekend, walked around, ate good food, sat on the porch of the place we rented and watched the mountains go dark in the evening. She said on the last night, "I keep thinking about that day you came home. You were so quiet in the car." "I was trying to figure out what to tell you," I said. "I knew the minute you walked in," she said. "I knew before you said a word." "What did you know?" She thought about it, that whatever was next was going to be different. I couldn't tell if it was going to be better or worse. I just knew it was going to be different. She was right about that too. It was different. It was better. I still make her coffee wrong every morning. That part hasn't changed. Some things you just can't fix, and you learn to love them anyway. I think about that parking garage a lot. The way the fluorescent light buzzed in the corner. The way I sat there with my hands on the wheel and felt something I couldn't quite name yet. It wasn't anger. It was closer to the feeling you get when a knot you've been pulling at for a long time finally lets go. What happened to me wasn't an accident, and it wasn't luck. It was the result of choices that stacked up over years, some made by other people, and some made by me. The new boss who handed me that folder didn't understand what he was letting go of. That's on him. But I had also spent years making myself easier to dismiss, packaging my instincts in careful language, softening my assessments, shrinking into a role that didn't require anyone to take me seriously as a builder. That part is on me. And I think I had to reckon with that honestly, before any of the rest of it could mean something. There's a cause behind every effect, even when the timing makes it look like coincidence. I didn't build the framework the night after I got fired. I built it over 18 months, in the quiet hours, when nobody was asking anything of me, and I was answerable only to the problem itself. The deal that followed wasn't a windfall. It was the downstream consequence of a decision I'd made years earlier, to keep one thing fully honest. To protect one piece of work from the slow compromise that comes with wanting to be liked and wanting to keep your job. That choice had a cost. And then, eventually, it had a return. What I've come to believe is that the kind of integrity that actually holds up under pressure isn't a feeling. It's a practice. It's the thing you do at 10 o'clock at night when nobody's watching and there's no immediate reward for doing it right. I kept records not because I expected to need them, but because the work deserved to be documented. I consulted an attorney not because I was planning something, but because I respected what I'd built enough to protect it. That's not strategy. That's just what it looks like when you take your own work seriously. The intelligence part, and I mean the real kind, not credentials or titles, is knowing what you actually have. So many people I've met over the years gave away their best thinking for a salary and a good review cycle. They signed IP agreements without reading them. They built things on company time that could have been built differently. I'm not judging that. I did it too for a long time. But there came a point where I understood that my knowledge was mine, my relationships were mine, my judgment was mine, and if I didn't protect those things, no one else was going to. The part that took the most out of me wasn't the negotiation or the legal process. It was the 14 days of sitting still, of not knowing exactly how it would land, of trusting that the work was good enough without being able to prove it yet. That kind of patience, the kind where you keep moving forward without the confirmation you want, that's the thing that either breaks you or builds you into something that can't be easily undone. I'm 52 years old. I still make my wife's coffee wrong every morning. I'm not someone who has it all figured out. But I know this, the folder on the desk wasn't the end of anything. It was just the last thing that needed to happen before I stopped waiting for permission.